Hello, you are listening to Sisu Journey, where we teach you the tools and science to embody the Finnish mindset word Sisu. That means extraordinary resilience, courage, and determination in the face of extreme adversity. I am your host, Helena Lucia, and I'm here to guide you down the journey I myself am on with science and stories of resilience. Please remember the views discussed in this podcast are mine alone and not the views of my employer. Also, please remember to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps get the word out. Today, we're talking with Emily. Emily was born and raised in San Francisco Bay Area, where she grew up loving sports and the outdoors. She also spent a lot of her childhood in the San Juan Islands, Washington, where her father lived, enjoying sailing and more outdoors. As a teenager in the early 90s, she became a leader and a role model in her quiet suburban community when she came out at the age of 15 and started the first gay-straight alliance at her high school. She went on to become a veterinarian and currently lives in Portland, Oregon. Emily has a love for science, writing, exploration of the mind, and spending as much time in the woods as possible. Emily was very gracious to share her story with us in such a vulnerable way. We decided to remove names from the story to make this container a little more safe for her to share. Emily's pronouns are she, her, and just a warning, this episode discusses abuse by a teacher, suicide, and has a bit of spicy language, so please take care while listening. Hello, welcome Emily to the program. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here.
So Emily, tell me a little bit about your story of resilience, whatever you'd like to share.
All right. Well, I think that the big story of resilience that I have comes from a 5.5-year relationship with a teacher at my high school. Started when I was 17. So beginning of my senior year, we were together that whole year, and then it lasted for 4.5 more. And that stole from me early years of my 20s. It stole college from me. It stole my last year of high school. I was completely isolated. I was in this, quote unquote, relationship with someone who was really mentally unstable, suicidal, and it just kept me trapped. And it took me a long time to get out of that, but I did. And I went back to school, and I eventually became a veterinarian, and am working successfully and taking time to work on myself to deal with the consequences of that abuse. I mean, it took me a really long time just to figure out that it was abuse. That came in the last couple of years. So, there's that story of resilience, but also some things leading up to it that are a little bit more common, like growing up as a gay teenager in an upper class area with no other known gay students at my high school. Going through a really tough divorce with my parents when I was about 4 years old. Had those typical types of traumas too. And I think those things kind of led into the vulnerability that allowed me to get trapped in that relationship and be in it in the first place. So I'm just really proud of myself for getting out of that spot. And I got a really bad eating disorder because of the relationship. And that went on for several years. And I was able to suddenly turn it around and go back to school and succeed. And not a lot of people have done that. And yeah, that's my story.
So what were those pivotal moments that you feel like allowed you to kind of turn your story?
Yeah. So I was going to school it was my senior year of college, and I was still with the teacher, and I was making friends on my own. Finally, I was starting to get interested in a young woman, and it just kind of sparked this possibility in my brain that there could be something healthier and more exciting out there for me. And my trouble all along with leaving her had been that she was really unstable and would become suicidal, and I'd worry about her whenever I would try to leave. And I'll be honest, I wanted out of that relationship 6 months into it, but it kept me trapped for 5 more because of her instability. So during that senior year of college, I finally got to the point where I valued my life over hers and was sick of having to worry about what she would do to herself. And I stopped taking responsibility for that. And I said, I'm going to leave her. It doesn't matter whether she's going to try to kill herself or not. I need my life back.
Mm-hmm.
And that allowed me to leave her. And I'm shocked I was able to.
Yeah. Yeah. To get outside of that emotional hostage taking is a really powerful act.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I wish that maybe it hadn't taken me being interested in somebody else to make that change. And that it had come from recognizing how unhealthy the relationship is. Well, actually, I think it was both, but, part of me wants to think that I could have done it without having an interest, but that's just me being judgmental of my process.
Totally, because those catalysts are beautiful, no matter where they come from, right? Whether it's that kind of desire for something different or whether it's a desire to, move away from something unhealthy.
Yeah. I guess that's a good way of phrasing it, a desire for something different instead of just desire for someone else.
So then tell me about what happened next.
Yeah, there was another pivotal moment when I got out of my eating disorder, and that happened in the middle of my college year. So before I even got out of the relationship is when that change was made. And I was going to junior college, had really no hope for my future because I was trapped in this relationship. I was very much active and unhealthy in my eating disorder, and I had no plans to get better. I'd gotten into a couple of UC schools, visited them, started to pick out apartments, and was picking out these places just with an image in my mind of me just continuing to be very active in my eating disorder. And I will never forget the moment when I checked the mailbox at home and I got an acceptance letter from UC Berkeley. And I was so proud of myself for getting in there because it was a distinguished school. And I thought I finally had something I could be proud of and something exciting to look forward to. And it was right then that I decided to get better. And so I went and I researched treatment facilities that my insurance would cover. And I went and spent 8 weeks in a treatment center and kind of never looked back, really, in terms of acting on things with my eating disorder. So I'm proud of myself for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a major life-changing decision that you made.
Yeah.
What were some of the skills that you learned in treatment that were able to get you to, keep and stay healthy from that?
Really one day at a time. It was a 12-step based program, which I was weary of, but the one take-home message of really just taking it sometimes 1 hour at a time, knowing that I will be able to survive the next hour. So I can probably survive the one after that. Just get through it. And support of my peers was essential. And the meetings, a lot of people have opinions about them, but just being around other people who were open to hearing your crazy stories and how dysfunctional you were and loving and accepting, and then being able to get home from the inpatient center and find those meetings in my community where I had the similar peers was helpful. I didn't go to meetings for very long, but I was able to pick and choose what I needed and the 12-step program.
Nice. Yeah, that community is so powerful. That's one of the most powerful things I think about doing some of that work is doing it with others.
Absolutely. Yep. Group work is really powerful.
So much of this trauma that we experienced was in relationship. And so a lot of the healing has to be done in that co-regulated space.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that getting in a room and sharing your fucked up stories with other people and them relating and saying, oh yeah, like I got that too, or I can top you on that. And making you feel less shameful about what you've done and what you're doing, and releasing that shame and coming into more of a place of self-love and acceptance is really important.
That's beautiful. So then what next?
All right. So next, in terms of what happened after I left that relationship.
Whatever you are wanting to go to share your story.
Okay. So speed through some years where I go back to school. I start vet school in my 30s. I'm successful there. I push myself really hard. I have big plans for my future to specialize as a surgeon and go through an extra 6 more years of schooling. And I was really having a difficult time with what those extra 6 years were going to require of me, because you get placed in internships and residency programs and you basically match to them anywhere around the country that you apply. You don't entirely get a choice in this matter. And I was single and living in the Midwest. All of my family were on the coasts. I had just spent 4 years living in the Midwest, and then got an internship placement for a year in a neighboring Midwest state. So I was there for a year. I had a horrible schedule where I only had 1 day off a month, and the rest of the days were all spent on the clinic floor. And I was tired of being alone. I wanted to be in a relationship. I missed my family. So I read this book, and it really was a turning point for me as well in what I ended up doing with my future. And it's called Stumbling on Happiness by Daniel Gilbert. And essentially what I took from that book is that we're all really terrible at remembering our past and predicting our futures. We're always going to be off the mark with how happy we were or how happy we will be when we end up in a place that we work towards. And the only way to really know what's going to make you happy is to think about, it's really only your day-to-day experience that determines whether you're happy. It's not what's going to be in your future that makes you happy, because once you get there, we're typically not. We still have other stressors, or we're just, not satisfied. And so when trying to make a big decision in your life about where you want to go, the best way to determine whether you're going to be as satisfied and happy as you can be when you reach that goal is to look at people who are currently in that position and see how happy they are on a day-to-day basis. So I looked around me at the veterinary surgeons that I was working with, because that's what I wanted to be. And they were all pretty miserable. They spent really long hours at the clinic. They were exhausted all the time. They didn't get to see their family. They wanted to be outside gardening instead. They were doing fulfilling work, but the work life was killing them. And they were all usually cranky and irritable and not nice to people, save a few. If they ever listen to this, I don't want them to think that I think that, because were some wonderful people. But so I said, okay, well, I think that gives me my answer. I don't think I'm going to be happy as a surgeon. So I had been placed in a surgical internship in Las Vegas, and I decided not to go at the last minute. And I decided to move back to California and lived with family for a couple of months while I figured out where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And I landed in general practice and found a job up in Portland, Oregon, and couldn't be happier with the area that I live in, and have been able to have a life outside of work and my career and have a really great work-life balance. So that was a big, big turning point when I decided not to try to become a surgeon. And I'm so grateful for that decision now. Had done that, I wouldn't have the progress that I made in my emotional life that I have. And that progress all is related to the teacher and that abusive relationship. And, it started with this crazy story. So I'm going to tell you a story. I was spending that couple of months with my family while I figured out where I wanted to go. And I had just been in a string of short relationships that were troubled or unfulfilling. And I was really starting to wonder what was wrong with me and why I couldn't have a healthy, satisfying relationship. And I started thinking about the relationship with the teacher and wondering what effect it had on me. And I thought to this other student, and she was also abused by this teacher before I was. She was younger than I was. It wasn't as long of a relationship. When she left to college, things split off. But I had known her. We played soccer together, and we had grown close before she left for college, had a short fling, and that ended. And so I found out that this teacher and were together after I started my relationship with the teacher. It was a shock to me. And then I also found out that the school had been investigating what was going on between the two of them. And so, I knew about and I knew she had been through what I had been through. So I'm in California as an adult questioning these things about myself. And I say, I want to talk to and see where she's at, see if she's come to any insights about the effects this has had on her. So I go on Facebook and I look her up and I find out that she has passed. And I look up her obituary and she is buried in a nearby cemetery. And so strangely, the next day I was helping my mom out doing an open house. She's a real estate agent. And this property literally backed up to that cemetery. So I finished the open house for her and I decided to go find her gravesite. And I drive up this winding road and I really have no idea where I'm going. I figure that there might be some kind of a map somewhere or something. And I'm driving and I look and I see two people that I recognize, and it's parents.
Wow.
So yeah, I pull up and park and I walk up to them, and they didn't recognize me at first, but we'd known each other when we played soccer together. They were at the games and introduced myself, and they remembered me, and we started talking, and they told me what happened to and we were all crying, and it's a terrible story because became an alcoholic and died from complications related to her alcoholism. And they very much blame what happened to her while she was in high school with this teacher. And so I'm crying and I said, it must seem funny to you that I'm so upset. I'm here and I'm this upset because I shared an experience, and it's not my position to share her secrets with you. I don't know how much you know, and they interrupted me and said, well, we know that she was molested by a teacher when she was in high school. And I said, okay, well, that was it. Me too. And they were shocked that there had been another student after her. And they went on to tell me that the school had been investigating it and promised them that the teacher would be fired, and said she was put on leave for a year and allowed to come back, which is when she met me. So I find out this story and it just lights a fire under me to do more work. So we kept in touch. And
so at this time when you were having this conversation with her parents, this teacher was still teaching
in the same school district. Yeah. It had been a burden of mine since it happens that it would happen to another student, and it always made me really nervous that she was still teaching. And yeah, it had just been something I was carrying around. So I finally got to the point where I wanted to do something about it, and I ended up going to the police finally. It was, let's see, like 20 years later ish. And They were amazing. They took me very seriously, and I went down to California, and we did what's called a pretext call, where they record me talking on the phone with the teacher, and they we got her to confess to everything. We talked about the relationship. We talked about the sex we had when I was a minor. We talked about the sex she had with when she was 15, and the drinking she did with when she was 15, and she basically dug her own grave. And so they used that to arrest her a couple weeks later, and she was arrested in January of 2020, and was convicted, and is now on the sex offender registry list. But so that's been extremely healing. It was such a relief to know she was never going to work with kids again.
Yeah.
So I still can't believe the coincidence of me running into parents at the perfectly right time at her gravesite. And it makes me think that there's some kind of bigger energy out there that brings things into place that need to in order for some things to happen. There's too many things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So, so you've been going through this process with bringing her to justice since January of 2020. So that's about a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So tell me about what else on your journey, what other experiences have been able to bring you to this place of healing, or this part on your healing journey, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it was about that time in January that I also started doing medicine journeys with psychedelics with a spiritual guide. And my interest in doing that went back far. Actually, embarrassingly, the first time I heard about the benefits of psychedelics and came from learning about Tori Amos's life and her use of peyote. And that piqued my interest because I had always felt like there was something wrong with my brain. And hearing her experience made me realize that psychedelics might be a tool to change some of those feelings and rewire things. Mm-hmm. And so I'd kept that in the back of my brain for a long time, and I've been through so much traditional therapy in my life. I can't even count how many therapists I've had, and I've been in therapy, more than I haven't. And so finally, as an adult, I started feeling like I had the time and the power and also, unfortunately, the money to explore this option, because all I was familiar with was the trips down to Central America with the ayahuasca journeys that you pay for kind of as a tourist. And I was in this relationship with somebody who introduced me to DMT. And that was my first psychedelic experience. And that's an extremely powerful drug, medicine. And I had a really profound experience the first time I used it that was so healing, because I just felt this huge amount of love, and I had a conversation with this higher power entity that helped guide me and heal me. And I left that experience saying, oh my gosh, this is medicine. I never want to be without this again. Because it was kind of the only thing in my life that I experienced that had really changed me and hit me to the core. Like, you can talk in an office with a therapist and you can conceptualize things and know them, but until you feel them, you can't really do much or as much with that information. And DMT was the first time I actually felt what I was thinking. And so that motivated me to explore other modalities, and psilocybin came up. And I actually had a really great psychiatrist, and I mentioned it to him, and I was talking about the fact that I needed someone to sit with me. And he directed me to an online community where I found that person, this great spiritual guide that's been working with me for about a year now. And working with him, I have made leaps and bounds in my healing journey. So we have done psilocybin journeys and some LSD journeys, and I just can't say enough about what that has done for me.
So what were the fundamental changes, would you say, that you have experienced over that last year or so, going through these different journeys, and what kind of foundational changes has that impacted on your psyche?
I think that if I had to start with summarizing it, I would say that it has brought compassion and love into my life, and both for myself and for other people. And I think it started with feeling compassion for other people first, and then it evolved into myself as I did more work. But it basically helped me to drop some of my anger barriers, and it allowed me eventually to, forgive the things that have happened to me a bit, forgive other people for some of their behaviors that hurt me, so I didn't need to carry around negative feelings. And then I was able to eventually forgive myself for all that I've done, everything from acting out as a kid. And for example, I held so much shame, even as an adult, about this one incident when my friends locked me out of the car that we were all traveling in and were taunting me from the inside. And I got so angry because I really had some anger issues that I started kicking the side of the car. And that still haunted me. And I just looked at myself as this person with no control. And so my guide and I would sit in that situation and really work through it and have compassion for that little Emily and forgive myself because I was doing the best that I could. And I also needed to forgive myself for what I was doing in regards to the teacher, because I felt really guilty for ruining her life by turning her in finally.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's something I'm still working on. I think a lot of it comes from the fact that identifying it as abuse is really new to me still. And I sometimes slip back and think, no, I really cared about her. Is that kind of an abuse? And so I have done some work in identifying that abuse as well during my psychedelic journeys. But yeah, the other thing that has come up a lot during my journeys is my eating disordered behavior, and I don't really act on it anymore, but I give myself a hard time. Have a poor body image, and I'll never forget this one time during a journey when I basically slipped back into my anorexic body and felt like what it was like again, and was able to see from my current perspective how sick I was, how mean I was being to my body, how devoid of love for myself I was at the time. And it helped me carry forward into my current life, more love for myself and treating my body and myself kinder, and not being as judgmental.
Wow, that must have been a powerful moment of grief.
Oh God, I was sobbing. It was so sad. I was so sad for myself.
Mhm.
Um, I think that, yeah, grieving for the things that have happened to you is kind of one of the first steps to letting them go. And so
Mhm.
there's just a lot of crying during these sessions.
Yeah. Yeah, the grief work through psilocybin that I've done has been very, very life changing.
Yeah. A lot of my work has come up too, because I love veterinary medicine. I love medicine in general and animals. But nearly every single trip that I've done, I I say and talk about the fact that I am tired of hurting animals. And
Mm.
there's this part of practicing veterinary medicine where you have to stress out your patients, restrain them so you can give them an IV injection so that they feel better, or, place an IV catheter so you can put them under anesthesia and then they wake up and they've been through surgery and, their abdomen has been cut open or their
Mhm.
knee is, been cut, and then you just have to sit there and know that what you're doing ultimately is going to make them feel better. But meanwhile, they're scared and they're in pain.
Mhm.
And so that part really wears on me. But also seeing some of the neglect that occurs from owners that just don't know better, but their patient is, barely able to walk, or their pet is barely able to walk, but they say, "Oh no, I don't think he's in pain. It's just slowing down." It's like, "Oh,
Mhm.
your old dog can't go upstairs anymore. I think, you'd probably use some ibuprofen if you were having trouble going upstairs. Let's try some pain medications."
Mhm.
And just seeing these little helpless beings um, suffer sometimes is really hard. So every trip, I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. It
Mhm.
wears on me too much emotionally. So that's been interesting. Because
Mhm.
I worked really hard to get to where I am, and then to figure out in these trips that might not be exactly where I am happiest, is kind of a mind bender. And I think part of what, uh, well, one of the things that is related to that that's come up is kind of breaking down the shell of the ego and figuring out how or why I've constructed the ego that I have, and
Mhm.
some of it relating to past traumas, like with my dad leaving. And my dad is a medical practitioner. And so, did I become a veterinarian to impress him because I want his attention? Did I become a veterinarian because I want to see, because I came from a really like upper class area where everybody was driven to be something big and successful, and um, because I used to talk about it as a kid, so everybody just figured that was what I was going to do. And
Mhm.
and so to let go of that stuff and realize that maybe this is not exactly who I am was really powerful. Like, it's been about getting a sense of who I truly am aside from what I've constructed.
Yeah, that story of you that you've written and embodied is letting go of that is really monumental. I'm really also struck by how, you're talking about going into veterinary medicine, wanting to bring healing to these animals and all these beings, and then realizing that you're yourself with your job perpetuating trauma on them, to bring them healing ultimately. But in that moment, all it feels like to that little soul is trauma, right? So knowing that about what you're doing and being willing to sit with that is special in and of itself.
Yeah. It's funny. I realize as I talk and I share my story that I was willing to name the other victim, but not the teacher,
Mm-hmm.
like as if I'm still protecting her. Um, so I think it's only right to give her a name, and that's
Hmm.
um, and yeah, I think that's important for me to recognize, give her more of a persona, and yeah.
Yeah, and break down those barriers of protection that have been there for so long, and those responsibilities that you've taken that weren't yours to take, right?
Yeah, that was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what I was doing or how to get out of that because I was too young.
Well, I'm glad to hear as well that the police were so helpful with you and your story and so protective and caring. That's not always the common story. So that's great to hear what your experience was with that.
Yes, I am so grateful. I know that it can be terrible. So I feel blessed. Yeah, it just kind of seems like everything has gone right in the way that it was supposed to in the last few years of my life.
So how are you feeling now that this has kind of come to this resolution, this teacher was convicted and all of that has happened? How does that affect your day-to-day experience of this abuse?
Yeah. Well, I think about her a lot still. And I've done internet searches where I went to the database and I found out that she moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin from the Bay Area, which is something I know she probably wouldn't have been excited about, but she needed to get out of that area because there was major news coverage when she was arrested. It was all over all of the major news sources and, with her picture. And so I feel badly for her. I struggle with the guilt still. I wonder what she's up to. I wonder what she's feeling, if she's angry or if she feels sorry. And, with COVID, there's been a lot of delays in the court process. There's still another trial date that needs to happen with restitution, which was part of her sentence. Mm-hmm. And so that gets rescheduled every couple of months, and then date comes around and I get all anxious and I think about the fact that she's thinking about this and she's thinking about me and probably zooming in on a court case, and then I find out that it was delayed and it's going to be in another couple months, and so it just keeps like re-triggering the process a bit. Mm-hmm. So I'm doing work in therapy, trying to feel okay about the fact that I worry about her and care about her still. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I find myself thinking that I'm not angry enough about what happens, as if that's a measurement of whether it was wrong or not. So talking to my therapist recently, it was, no, you don't have to be angry, just for it to have been abuse and for you to recognize that it was. Like, that's not going to really serve you.
Yeah, interesting how much time we spend judging our reaction and response to what has happened.
Yeah. Boy, I know. Like, one of the things that my spiritual guide has helped me with the most is just sitting with the feelings I'm having and recognizing them and listening and being curious about it instead of just judging myself. Mm-hmm. It's been so powerful.
So how would you say the psychedelic journeys have really changed, like how you live day to day, how you see yourself, how you see others, if there's anything that we didn't cover?
I think I'm able to look at people around me that I interact with as being on their own journey. And it gives me a lot more patience for what they're doing or how we interact. I just holding compassion for myself allows me to hold more space for other people as well. I've also finally found myself in a healthy relationship. And
that's wonderful.
Yeah, that's a life changer. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you can think of that you'd like to share? You wish, if you were going to share with little Emily about what was going to happen in her life and what to hang on to, if there's anything that you'd like to say?
I think I would like to tell little Emily that she's doing the best that she can, given the circumstances she's in, and that it will get better.
Yeah. So is there anything that you do as a practice every day that you feel like promotes resilience in your life?
Yes, I have become a practitioner of Kundalini yoga. on a nearly daily basis, and either before work or in the evening. And I find that it really balances my energies and centers me. And it helps with anxiety and feelings of sadness, and increases my energy level. And it's been a game changer.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really like yoga as well. I've tried Kundalini and other types, but yeah, it definitely helps you move your energy in your body.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been really, really amazing.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing your story.
You're welcome. I'm really happy to share my story. I hope that it helps other people. That's part of why I do what I do, is hopes that, other people will benefit.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Sisu Journey and Emily's powerful story of resilience. If you're interested in watching the videos of our episodes, they're available on Patreon for our supporters. See you next week with another powerful story of resilience. Thank you, and have a resilient week.